The following is an interview to Maestro Sandro Russo, one of the musicians that I admire the most, a pianist coming from Sicily, born in Sicily, also under the name of Stanway and Sons, one of the most prestigious names when it comes to piano players. He granted me part of his time in order to talk with me and to share with me some of his experiences, and fortunately we will have him in Germany during the month of October and November, playing at the Schumann House and at the Piano Saloon in Dresden. Dear Maestro, thank you so much first of all for your time and for being able to come to my place here in New York City and give me the chance to ask you some questions for my channel before your performances in Germany. I know very well that you performed in the past in Berlin, also in Dresden, but never in the city of Leipzig.
That's right.
Not yet. And well, your curriculum is basically extreme. You had been performing a huge variety of repertory, massive, I would say. And my first question to you is which one is your favorite composer to perform and why?
Well, first of all, thank you for such a flattering introduction. As to your question about my favorite composer, it's always a difficult one to answer because there is more than one. However, most of my performing repertoire, concert repertoire, seems to be centered very much around the Romantic period. So, by all means, the works, the composers I'm playing for this occasion in Germany are absolutely my favorite. I can say that. Chopin, Schumann, and Liszt. So definitely in this particular moment of my life for these concerts, these are my favorite composers. But it's always tough if someone asks me to narrow down to one composer. That's actually impossible because I also love the Russian romantics, the French romantics. I love even a lot of the classical Baroque repertoire, even though I play less. So it's always impossible for me to narrow it down to one composer. But those certainly, and you know, when I play any composer in that moment, that feels as if it's my favorite, for sure.
And let me ask you something, you know, to be as a musician myself, you know, and a performer, as an opera singer, you probably agree with me that music, and to become a real professional, demands a lot of dedication, discipline, commitment, love, a lot of quality, a lot of hundreds and maybe thousands of hours studying in order before arriving in a professional level. Would you consider classical music kind of like a religion? Taking into account all the qualities that are necessary?
It's a very interesting question because, as a matter of fact, if there is really one religion I particularly follow or care for, actually that has to be art music. Sometimes I even hesitate to call it classical music just because it may seem a little bit restrictive. But certainly the music I play and all the composers, again, all the masters composers that I spend so much of my life into mastering their works and trying to do so. Certainly this becomes really probably more than a religion. It becomes a way of life, something that has to me.
Like a symbiotic relationship.
Yes, I mean it has all the ingredients that life is worth living for. I mean, certainly all the beauty, the inspiration that comes from this composer, and that we want to also bring to others. And of course, without discipline, we don't accomplish really anything, which is another thing that then leads to the passion. In order to keep that discipline, we have to have passion, love, as you said, and but this becomes completely a journey, something that from the moment that we wake up, immediately becomes a purpose to.
Could you tell us how many hours do you spend a weekly basis, training?
It's difficult to be precise on that question because it's never the same every day. Then if I consider really the time that I spent at the piano and the time that I'm still working, in a way I'm processing what I did at the piano, but even away from the instrument. So in light of that, I feel that I'm actually really practicing sometimes 24 hours a day. Even when I sleep, I'm still processing certain things often. And you will be surprised to hear sometimes some of the most amazing solutions, even about technical things, have been found away from the instrument. I'm not encouraging the idea of practicing away from the instrument because actually I need also this physicality with the piano, and I love it. But there have been times that even away from the instrument I found very interesting things, solutions about technical things or musical things. Yes. So because of that, I'm inclined to say that I'm a musician. I'm a full-time musician in the sense of also thinking even away from the piano, and that's to me also part of practicing and developing some work with those pieces.
Do you have any favorite male pianist, and why?
Living or
No, in general speaking, on the whole.
That's another difficult question because
It's
again,
very difficult. All my questions are
just
very difficult because I understand
Yes.
very well what's going on, but
just like composers, it's very hard to narrow down to one because
absolutely.
you see, with composers, we need all the flavors. There are moments that maybe we are more drawn to the romantic, moments that we are more drawn to the modern literature, or all of them, all of those styles at the same time.
Yeah.
In a way, I think that we as interpreters, we cannot. It's very hard to be convincing with every segment of the piano literature. So I say this because there are great pianists who have been amazing interpreting, let's say, the classical literature. I mean, Beethoven, Schubert.
Yeah.
Other great pianists that have been more centered in the romantic repertoire, others in the contemporary even. So, but of course then there are, still I can name several of my favorite pianists that were such a great influence for me. And sometimes just like when you're very passionate about something, it's very hard to say why. But
is one in particular with whom you felt a little bit attached? In my case, personally,
yes,
in my
career,
you have.
And also consider these changes every time, because there were musicians that I grew up loving, and many years later, I'm even surprised.
It's interesting, why you love
yes,
such a person,
And there were even musicians, for example, that when I remember in my musical youth, I wasn't mature enough to appreciate. For example, one of them, Jorge Bolet, this wonderful Cuban-born pianist. I just felt I couldn't understand
Never heard of him.
many of his choices when I was listening to him as a youngster. But now, the more I feel I grow as a musician, the more I appreciate him. Same thing with Claudio Rao. These are pianists that also, they are not for everyone to appreciate, because you have to have a certain depth in order to understand their greatness. Then of course, it's in a way easier to fall in love with pianists like Horowitz, because I think in a way there is that element of being appealing, more also the flash element.
Character,
Yes, much more.
He was
How can I say, extroverted in a way of.
Exactly. It was a very funny man, Horowitz.
Well, of course.
I listened to him, talking in some interviews that you can find even on YouTube, and it was impressive. What the sense of humor that he had.
Absolutely, but that's something.
And not just that, so open that he was even here in New York City in Studio 54 at night, dancing sometimes, something
Yes.
that was unheard of, a classical music artist dancing and celebrating life in Studio 54 in New
It's
York
interesting
City.
you say that, because I think that the humor is a side that is certainly part of most geniuses, composer and musicians, despite classical music sometimes conceals this aspect of of a musician's personality. But I think that without a good sense of humor, actually, we cannot do what we do.
Yeah.
and I think it's actually a very important component of being a musician. So it's also very inspiring when some of those giants showed the side of their personality that was.
You know that the rumors around in the business are from some journalists and some people, they refer to you as the new Maurizio Pollini.
I've never heard that, actually.
There were some rumors, yes, around.
And I can't quite understand why.
Which also, impressed me a little bit. Maybe just from the fact that you are Italian, because I found you with much more fire than
But
Pollini.
I have to tell you something though. When I was growing up musically, actually I revered his pianism so much, his recordings. It's true that I grew up listening so much to him and really loving and with a huge admiration for him. I wonder if this somehow really had an influence, because there are still many aspects that I revere his playing for. However, like I was saying before, there was also an element of his very masculine playing, is also extremely virtuoso approach to, and I mean virtuoso of course in a very deep level, and it's not virtuoso in a flamboyant level. But even so, back then I remember spending so much time seeking for his recording, listening to him. Now actually I don't listen to his recording so much anymore. That's why I'm more into pianists from the so-called golden age, and by that I mean pianists like
Rubinstein.
well, yes, but even before, and especially less known pianists. I mean, less known to the general public, of course, to the piano connoisseurs. They're very well known and loved. Actually, even more so, I feel. And so I'm talking particularly about those musicians like Cortot, Ignaz Friedman, and also one of my absolute favorite, Beno Mojsevich, who is not again very well known to most of the even music lovers, unfortunately, I have to say, but certainly among the piano connoisseurs, he's absolutely one of the best. And then Joseph Hoffman, another piano god of mine.
Well, me particularly, I have a particular love to Alfred Brendel.
Yes, me too, absolutely. Yes.
I think that him playing Mozart is sublime.
Yes, another musician that actually I also grew up listening to is Schubert, and it's also very beautiful to say that certain recordings, I loved them so much back then, and I still love them the same way now. So when something actually hasn't changed even so many years after discovering
Yeah.
those treasures, it's actually really amazing and a great testament, I think, that there is really some kind of
What
demon
about female
emerging.
pianists?
Oh, a female piano. Also, it's funny because I did grow up listening to so many of Martha Argerich recordings,
Yes,
which of
very
course I remember being so impressed by her
The
piano
interpretations.
playing. Yes, yes, moved by her interpretations and of course one of the most wonderful virtuosos. But now, even regarding female pianists, I've discovered some of the older ones, especially some of these great Russian artists who back then the
Type of Maria Yudina.
yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
or Rosa Tamarkina.
Did you hear the story about Stalin and Maria Yudina? That Stalin was in the afternoon, listening to the broadcast in the radio of the Concerto Number 23 by Mozart,
Mhm.
with her playing live, and after the concert was done, he requested a recording of that concert, and nobody recorded anything. So they woke her up in the middle of the evening. They put the entire orchestra together in the middle of the night, and even the conductors, they were trembling, and they had to try 3 different conductors in the entire evening. She was waiting, very relaxed, very quietly, and she played the entire concert. And when the day break, they had the recording ready, and they brought it to Stalin, and he didn't even realize that all this thing was done in the middle of the night in order to satisfy his pleasures.
Sounds like a very Russian story, but indeed very, very, very moving. Yes, it's amazing to discover some of these old recordings, most of which I believe were just done there in Russian, and it's also sad to think that these artists didn't really have an opportunity to perform in the Western
Yeah.
world, and so they had their careers just within a very small.
Just asking you, something else in reference to composers. Why do you think that most of the top composers they are able to reach the top of recognition and appreciation after death?
Well, in the cases of some of these, the greatest geniuses, I can think of, take even Chopin, Schumann, Liszt. I think one of the reasons is certainly because they were great innovators, and they were so ahead of their times that a lot of what they wrote was a little bit too brave to be appreciated or even performed by people of their generation. So this, I think, is definitely, this has to be the case with Chopin, Schumann. I mean, their music is still very audacious, even for our times, and still there is so much that we haven't understood. It's a language that is so hard, so complex, actually, to really comprehend. Sometimes even weird in a most creative way, and our vocabulary of sound, especially in our time, is so broad. So I can only imagine when we think of, again, Chopin, Schumann, Beethoven, I mean, even Bach. It's just I'm not actually even surprised in retrospect that they had
Mozart, Wagner,
that they had most of their
even Verdi.
full recognition after by future generations of performers and musicologists who again had an opportunity to reevaluate their compositions and do justice to them. So
let me ask you something. What do you believe that is the reason of the decrease of interest in classical music?
This reason can only be found in the decay of music education over the decades. Because I don't think that human beings have evolved in a way that they don't find any more interest in the so-called classical music. Another, again, it's a bit of inaccurate terminology, but definitely the poor music education that the school system have provided in the past decades, I definitely consider is responsible. Then,
Because it always comes to the question of why to educate people in classical music if classical music is not profitable.
well,
What are we
but
producing is the $1 million question that many people they don't understand, and that's the reason why they don't see why they have to be educated in classical music, because it seems that we don't produce anything.
well, it's a very materialistic
Way of thinking.
way of thinking, indeed, because there are also many things that are not a source of big monetary gains, and yet I think they contribute so much to our cultural formation and also our sensibility and as people. So I think music is one of them. Nowadays, unfortunately, there is so much focus on forging performers, competitors
Yeah.
in young generations, to the point that this is almost not. In a way, it cannot even catch up with the range of opportunities that there are in the world. Even the number of concert venues that there are in the world, it can't catch up with that. So there is so much focus on creating these competitors, but then again, at the same time, the general level of music education is definitely deteriorating. And again, this is something that I very much blame the school system for, because I'm talking from experience. If some of these young people that listen only to whatever it is, rock or heavy metal or rap, I can bet anything that if the same people we invite over, and if you play live, because this is also very important, music is something that has to be listened to live, in a live setting. But if I play a piece for them, whether it's a Schubert impromptu or a Chopin nocturne, I'm totally sure that these people will actually respond very well to the music, that this music will definitely awake something in
But
their
it's
souls.
interesting what you mentioned, previously in reference to sensibility.
Yes, because I think the most important aspect of listening to music and developing, becoming certainly acquainted to the great music and having this exposure, listening exposure, of course, whether one performs it or not, that's of course another thing, but even just being exposed to this music is something that very much affects our sensibility, our perception of things, and I think this is definitely in a good way, because
There
it
is a
creates.
misconcept of sensibility equals weakness.
Yes,
And
yes.
that is one of the biggest problems that we have, because the less sensibility people have, basically the more apathic they become.
Yes, unfortunately, nowadays, being classical musician again, being concert artist, I mean, from the moment actually you start entering competitions and you have already this kind of musical experiences, unfortunately, it's not really so much about how refined as a musician you are most of the times, how sensible you are, even as a performing artist. but it's more actually about other attributes that usually um, determine the success of some individuals over others. So I agree with you that maybe being sensitive nowadays is considered a weakness, and this is really sadly the way that our society is structured.
You know that I had this conversation once with Irina Brunner. Irina Brunner is the sister of Jules Brunner. In the past, she's dead now, more than 20 years ago. Um, and during our conversation, she was a soprano, no? A very prestigious soprano in Russia, basically, and even more famous in Russia than her brother in America, making all these movies. But we had this conversation one time, you know, and she said, what we produce is for each person to discover. What we create with our skills, with our talent, is for each human being to discover, to find out. You know, and it's the same reason why all these compositions, because it has an effect in the people's emotions, you know, and in the conception that they have of life and the way they see everything around them. It's the powerful mystery of music.
It's very true, because also it's amazing that each individual will respond in a very unique way to this music. So, which is also one of the reasons why we still perform works that have been interpreted and recorded hundreds, if not thousands of times, is because again this music has the power to evoke always something new, and also each one responds to these works in a very particular way. So it's definitely something that accounts for the value, the eternal value of certain compositions.
Let me ask you something now, a little bit off
Mhm.
our conversation, just something personal in this case, that I try to ask to to my colleagues connected to these podcasts
Yes.
that I will be facing. You know, have you ever experienced anything paranormal in your life or on stage? You know, like certain people, like I'm not talking kind of like Florence Forster Jenkins, that she thought that Mozart was sitting in the audience, you know, and she said that she saw him. But in one occasion, in my case, I remember performing Don Carlo, and I was alone on stage. Everything was pitch black, and I noticed that like something was moving. And it was not a technician, because that was like, you know, a box basically. And 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 well, it felt like some kind of energy on a stage, some kind of energy from the past, some kind of old power around, you know, which didn't give me any fear. But well, what about in your case? Have you ever experienced something like that?
Probably not to that level. I mean, probably, but this is probably more funny to say than paranormal. But well, I remember actually that once, I think it was back in 2002, I did give a concert in the city of Palermo, and this was I remember a concert where I performed a very, very heavy virtuoso program that ended, among other things, I remember with a very powerful transcription of the Stravinsky Firebird for solo piano.
Mm.
And I played also other pieces in the program, like the Schiffer arrangement of the Flight of the Bumblebee, this kind of really war horses. And I remember I mean, I was feeling really something very, very intense in terms of this energy, and then I heard actually that after my concert, because then actually I went back to my hometown, but then I heard that there was an earthquake, not a big
Oh.
one, but it's very unusual because I had never heard
It was
of
the earth
any
probably shaking.
right, but never in that city. I mean, you will get some earthquake maybe in some other areas
So
of Sicily, but never there. And I thought, I don't know, I felt in a way I couldn't help but to feel somehow responsible for that. Otherwise, every time actually, when I study a piece, I feel that this is actually my most intimate moment with composers.
Yeah.
By all means, I do feel that there is a connection, as if really I'm speaking in a way, I'm communicating with the great composers.
Yeah.
Maybe more when I'm discovering a work, because when I perform it, there are other factors in the actual performance that in a way you have to be aware of in a different way, including the audience, including your control of the performance.
Yeah.
But when you discover a piece, that's when I feel that there is something really so magic that it feels almost as if I'm communicating with, well, of course I am, but maybe in an even deeper way than just learning their music. And it's like that.
It's a spiritual experience in a way.
Very, very spiritual.
Yes, in my case, I can also agree with you in that sense. That every performance, it's some more than others, but every performance, every time that I am on stage, I feel that there is something transcending, something like the touching from the body and going, with some kind of energy somewhere else.
It's very powerful. It can be very, very powerful. And
because it's very funny. Many people, they come and they came to me and say, "How do you feel singing and performing in front of 10,000, 15,000 people, all of them, cheering?" The last thing that I was thinking was how many people were
exactly
around. Yeah.
Because I've always felt that beyond a certain number,
exactly,
whether it's 500 or 5,000, beyond, let's say, a certain number, which could be even 100 or 200, I think actually it doesn't matter anymore.
Doesn't matter anymore. Do you have any advice for the new generation?
Oh,
new generation, millenniums who are ready to listen to your advice.
Big responsibility you are giving me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I want to just say something very simple, that the most important, we're actually talking before about forging new generations of competitors, even before musicians actually, and how this is creating certainly excellent young pianists, but this doesn't mean necessarily that this kind of mental attitude will necessarily mature into very fine musicianship. I feel that whoever would like to pursue the study of any instrument, not just piano, seriously, I really think the most important thing remain to just let this do something to you, make you a different person, and a person who loves this, a person who understands the deepest meaning of being musicians, which is not, again, to be found in winning this contest or the one, but again, something that has to do more with this very, very deep and completely inseparable love with the instrument and with music. So it's a journey where obviously there has to be discipline, passion, and something that every day has to be nurtured with time, with also making a lot of good choices and learning from our mistakes, and it's something really it stays with us throughout our life, from the beginning till the end. It's not something that has just one goal and that's it, and then maybe after the goal things become less interesting, but it's something that really goes with our life. It accompanies us in that journey called life, and we should look at music in the same timeline of life. And because young musicians, I don't think actually they need so much of my advice, because I see the level of proficiency nowadays is extremely high. So it's very hard to give any more than that advice to any young musician, just considering how high today's standards are.
Maestro, thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to your concerts, as well as many people in the city of Leipzig, to your concerts in Germany and in Leipzig and in Dresden, and your debut at the Schumann House this season. And thank you also for accepting the invitation and bringing your talent to Europe once
I'm
again.
just honored to perform there anytime I have an opportunity.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
You're welcome. Thank you.